What is up, YouTube? It's your boy Millzy, back with Hometown Commander. We're back for our first episode, really, of this that we've ever done on the channel, and that's the main updates that I'm doing for Murders at Karlov Manor for my main decks. This episode is just going to be these 6 decks that I consider to be my main decks. We'll do another episode with what I'm testing at the moment. But I'll talk a little bit about what's in my main deck box at the moment, how it's changed over the last little bit, what updates we've done for, what updates we did for Lost Caverns of Ixalan, what updates I'm considering for Karlov Manor. But I think for all of these decks, I'm actually going to wait until Thunder Junction to really make any changes. We have the Fallout decks as well coming, so we'll kind of keep earmarking some cards and kind of putting them in and thinking about if they fit in, and then we'll make some of those big changes when that set comes up. The real reason is because for each deck, there's really only like one card that I really want to fit in, and so there's kind of no point. I'd rather, for a couple of these decks, there's still changes from Ixalan I haven't really tested out yet, and I'd rather keep going on those. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go deck by deck. I'm actually going to, I've been really terrible lately at putting chapters in the videos, but I'm actually going to do that on this video. So I'll tell you, we'll be able to go through all 6 of these decks. If you care about a certain deck in particular, I'll make sure that you can see it. It's going to be more of a long form video, but what I want to do is just talk to you about my process of how I approach my main decks, what I'm looking for, how I'm editing these, how I'm approaching these, just so you can see a little bit more of how do I maintain my decks? What do I look at? So the 6 decks that I consider to be my main decks at the moment are my Sirach and Goreclaw deck. This is the most recent iteration after Merchant Machine of my original Goreclaw Terror of Kelsizma deck. On a green Stompy, a deck that I truly love, and it's one of my favorites to hand to new people to have them just see what fun Commander can be. Miram Dragons. It's a dragon combo deck that either tries to go infinite combats or big damage off of making creatures come in. It's a little bit sweaty for some pods, so this isn't a deck I get to play all the time, but it's a deck I really enjoy, and it's probably my favorite teamer deck I've ever built. Probably the deck that I enjoy playing the most of these 6, and a deck that I will always enjoy is Jetmir Tokens, aka the Great Catsby. This is a deck that I truly love, getting the 9 creatures ramming through your opponents and just having a good time. The deck focuses a lot on trying to make tokens through X spells or X cost abilities, where you get to choose how much you make based on the mana. I find that it helps you, if you ever get board wiped towards the end of the game or towards the mid game, allows you to rebuild even faster, hopefully more than your opponents. No fast mana in the deck. We're just using things like Awaken the Woods or Jaheira or Phyrexian Altar, things like that to make mana and just try to push it over for our opponents. Alayla is one of the deck that I tried to make fun to bling it out. This is a deck that I had made a long time ago and took apart, but at the end of the day, I wanted to put it back together because it was a commander I really enjoyed. A lot of people put this deck towards artifacts, but my deck tries to play the enchantments more than the artifacts. The artifacts are mainly just in here for the mana. But this is a deck that I've had a ton of fun playing, a ton of fun upgrading, and although it's not shown on the mock field here, some of these cards are the more fancy versions, and so it's kind of cool to bling the deck out and make it look cool and just have a ton of fun. You stack fairy tokens up, and most of the time you win the game either in the air or with a big alpha strike. A deck that I've had a ton of fun playing and I'm still learning is Timey Wimey. This is the Timey Wimey precon from the Doctor Who decks, a show that my wife and I both really love, and I thought, why not take it and turn it into a deck? My goal over the last few months has been to get some fun treatments for all the Doctor Who cards in this deck, so I've gotten the showcase arts for Rose and the 10th Doctor and a bunch of the other Doctors in the deck as well. Added a bunch of support, including the pretty Quintorius can there. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to put cards into Suspend. Rose as a win con, getting bigger and bigger for each card you have a time counter on it. We have ways to make copies of Rose or to make Rose unblockable, or we have things like the War Doctor that can be alternate win cons. But at the end of the day, you're just going to have some fun and try to beat through your opponents with Rose or just general spell value. And then the 6th deck I consider to be a part of my main box, just because I've had so much fun upgrading this deck and putting all my favorite dinosaurs in it, is Pantlaza Sun Flavored, aka Sun Favored. Panlaws is a deck that as soon as I saw the card I wanted to build. Gishath was my first commander deck I ever built, and Gishath is a creature that I have a lot of love for, but its play pattern can be very tough for some people, or some people don't really enjoy. And I was really hoping for a dinosaur deck that was a lot more mid-range. I don't mind Zakama, but it was never really what I wanted from a dinosaur deck, and I think Panlaws is exactly what I want. You get a little bit of blink, you get a little bit of fun, but you get to just play a huge section of fun dinosaurs and fun effects. This deck has been a ton of fun to put together. It's a ton of fun to play, and it's a fun deck always to hand to other people as well, because they don't realize how good some of these dinosaurs are, especially when you can get them on the board at the same time. Okay, well, let's do it. Let's start with Sirach and Goreclaw. What I hope, if I ever become more popular on this platform, if I ever start to play people at conventions and things like that, this is the deck I hope people know me for. Mono green, pure unadulterated stompy. I love this deck. This is everything I love about mono green, big creatures slamming into our opponents. Of course, I think the deck shines because Sirach and Goreclaw can give all of those creatures a +1/+1 counter and haste when they come in, and that allows you to play green creatures that I never was able to play in Terror of Kalsisma. By that I mean that the reduction on Goreclaw being 2 less if they're because you're 4 greater is what made the deck the way it is, right? But by coming over to Sirach and Goreclaw, we get to play things that hit harder in this deck because of the implications of that. My favorite example of that is Apex Devastator, a 10-mana 10/10 with Cascade 4 that in games I've seen put 5 creatures with haste and the +1/+1 counter on there that help me end the game when this spell gets cast. Another perfect example I talk about is Pathbreaker Ibex, a 6-mana 3/3 that in Sirach and Goreclaw would probably be dead on board the turn you play it because it doesn't have haste and there's no way for it to attack. But in this deck, it's coming down in with haste, and it's going to give everybody trample and +X, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. You don't need the Crater Hoof to win the game. Pathbreaker Ibex can be just as good and helpful when it comes to slamming into your opponents and having good TAM. And I feel the same way about Thunderfoot Baloth, a card that, of course, could get played in Terra Calcisma, but feels just as good here because all those creatures are coming in this turn, still get that +2/+2 and trample, and are able to slam into our opponents. Lost Caverns of Ixalan saw some great upgrades for this deck. I finally put Kami of Whispered Ones in the deck. I don't know why I went back and forth so much on this card, but I put it back in a couple games. 1 or 2 games I've played with it. It's actually shown some promise. I've always been a big fan of Elysian Caryatid and Whisper of the Wilds, these 1-mana mana dorks that can actually tap for 2. But of course, you have things like Selbala and Gwenna that do really well, and I think Kami's kind of in that same boat of the bigger it gets, the better it gets. Kogla finally came back in. I love this new Secret Lair printing, and so I got one, and it's a creature I've always loved. It was an all-star in Goreclaw, and I wanted to bring it back in. Of course, here Kaslam was the big card from Ixalan that came in for it, being a 6/5 that when it hits somebody, you can get a creature into or land and put them on the battlefield. It's good. You can cheat out some great creatures that way and just have some fun. And then we finally put Kadama the West Tree in here. Card I was surprised I didn't have in here, but the cool part is that any creature with a +1/+1 counter on them has trample, which is great. And then whenever you hit somebody, you get a basic land. Just a way to ramp up, make sure that you're getting more things down and kind of really taking advantage of the advantage you have over your opponents. And then I finally added Ulvenwald Hydra in here. Again, this was a card I was really surprised wasn't in here. Power and toughness equal to the number of lands you control. Whenever it ETBs, you get to search for a land and put it on the battlefield tapped. Again, there are scenarios where this doesn't come down as big as you'd hope, but with some other ways that we get to get extra lands and things like that. It's just going to get big, and it's just going to get hard for your opponents to deal with. As far as spells go, the spell lineup for the deck really hasn't changed. Contest of Claws came in from that Lost Caverns of Ixalan commander set, the ones that were in the set boosters. I love this card, and it feels really great in this deck, especially when your creatures are just absolutely massive. I really wanted to fit the Skullspore Nexus in here because that's a card I really enjoy, but I put the 1 copy of it that I had into Pantlaza, and so I ended up not putting it in here. But to talk about the cards from Mirza Karlov Manor, or what I do from main decks is every time a set comes out, I will do my own research or go through the EDH rec pages and see what am I not playing that other people are playing, and is it something I should consider. So my considering board is always cards that the next time I sit down to edit my decks, what am I looking at to see if it needs to come in? Well, for Karlov Manor, I think the biggest card that got released that Goreclaw would care about is Archdruid's Charm. This is a 3-mana spell. It says you can pick one, search for a creature or land and reveal it. Put it to the battlefield, tap if it's a land, otherwise put it into your hand. Put a counter on target creature and it deals damage equal to its power to target creature you don't control, or exile target artifact or enchantment. I like this spell a lot because it's kind of what you want from a charm. It's a worldly tutor that puts something to your hand on the one. It's effectively a bite effect like that Contest of Claws in the middle one, although you don't get the discover on this one. Or it's a beast with an effect that exiles. Like this is a good card. I really like it. I think it probably will come in when I do these updates because I think I like how versatile it is, right? Like all three of these effects are good, especially the top one. If you need to get something like Pathbreaker, Ibex, or one of those this turn, it'd be good to go get it, put it in your hand, and that's what I really like about it and why it's on the top of my list of something I'd want to put in. The other new card from Karlov Manor I'd be kind of interested in is Case of the Trampled Garden. When it comes in, you put 2+1/+1 counters among 1 or 2 creatures you control. Solve it to get total power of creatures 8 or greater. That's pretty easy. And then whenever you attack, put a counter on target attacking creature. It gets trampled. Again, it's not the flashiest of cards, but I think it might be worth it to get a counter on something and give it trample if Soraka ever leaves the battlefield or you don't have something that gives your creatures trample. I think getting trample on the right thing might be important. Again, it feels odd for 3 mana. Like I don't know that I'm in love with the card, right? But I think it has what you'd kind of want for this deck, being something that slightly cares about +1/+1 counters. So, if you had that Kadama of the West tree out, this is something that would still be able to benefit and get some creatures online as far as tokens go. And then the third card is Glimpse the Core from Law's Cave of Ixalan. Just get a basic forest, put it in the battlefield tapped, or return a cave. Really, it's just another copy of Rampant Growth. If we really wanted one, this is a copy of Rampant Growth, a second copy of Rampant Growth in the deck. I play no cave lands, so this does effectively not that, but it would be just another copy of Rampant Growth if that's something I want. I can see the argument for it. Soraka Goreclaw is 6 mana. I very seldom have issues with mana in this deck because of how many mana dorks and ramp spells I have in the deck, but I can understand why another one might be beneficial. I'm playing Cultivate, Explore, Kadama's Reach, Rampant Growth, and then I'm playing Wild Growth and Utopia Sprawl. So it's not like I'm just playing 1 or 2 ramp spells. I'm playing a bunch of these ramp spells. And then at the same time, we're playing Whisper of the Wilds, Gwenna, Selvala, Elysian Carelitted, Kami the Whispered Ones. So there's plenty of mana dorks in here. It's not like we're just relying on just the ramp spells, which is kind of the reason that stops me from putting Glimpse the Core in there. And the fourth big card that I'm surprised I never put it in here, and it's just because I've used this card more often recently in other decks, and I'm starting to realize why it might be really good in here, and that's Inspiring Call. Draw a card for each creature with a counter on it, and give all creatures those creatures indestructible. Striking Goreclaw is very good at distributing creatures to counters to creatures that come in, and not necessarily counters to everything, which might be the thing that we need to try to maybe fix to make Inspiring Call perfect. But I think it does make Inspiring Call very good for what the deck will do once you get Soraka Goreclaw down. This deck, unlike other decks, very seldom has issues with mana because you just have so much of it laying around. But it's a card that I really like the idea of. And the fifth card is actually from Wilds of Eldraine, but is a card that I just hadn't put in, was Feral Encounter. I've played this a couple times in my Brawl version of this in this deck, and it seems to be half decent. I'm not completely sold on it in Commander yet. Look at the top 5. Put a creature card from among them. Exile a creature from among them, put the rest on the bottom, cast that exiled card this turn. At the beginning of your next combat phase this turn, target creature you control deals damage equal to its powered up to one of the creatures. So it's a bite effect, but you also get to get a creature and cast it. I see the benefit of it mid to late game when this deck's making a ton of mana and you don't have as many cards in your hand. This could be a way for you to get a creature, get it down, and that's another creature potentially with haste that you could slam into your opponents with, right? I see the benefit of it. I just know that don't know that I'm there yet on it. So those are kind of the 5 cards right now that I'm the most interested to bring in. But like I said, I would love to do this maybe once we get towards Thunder Junction. Maybe we can do an actual live stream or something where I go through and talk about the more one-to-one replacements for what I would do. Getting into Miram, this is a deck that got I would say not a hefty update in Lost Caverns Ixalan, but a good enough update. There's a couple cards that I added that I couldn't believe weren't in here, but I think make a ton of sense. The first is Coalesce Scale Singer, being able to cast dragons from the top of our library, and it's a dragon itself. Makes a ton of sense, and allows us to always see what's coming next. Same thing with Lozen, Dragon's Legacy. Whenever we cast an adventure or dragon spell, it deals damage equal to that spell's mana value to any target that isn't a commander. This, I feel like, really pairs with things like Terror of the Peaks, which is just going to help us deal damage to our opponents as we get ourselves towards our main combo engine. It's also just going to hurt our opponents along the way. And a lot of our dragons aren't cheap spells, meaning this should hopefully ping our opponents for some good damage. Another thing that I added in here that I'm really excited to use and haven't used that is Life Finds a Way from the Jurassic World set. Whenever a non-token creature with power 4 or greater comes in, populate. This makes a ton of sense in this deck since I'm making a lot of copies of dragons that are tokens and them being non-legendary. This would, if you had any way to make a copy of Miram, which I do, give you other copies of Miram to make more copies of the dragons that come in. Or make a copy of a creature like Scourge of Valkus or Terror of the Peaks, which is just to start dealing damage to our opponents when dragons come in to help us push towards ending the game. We also added that Virtue and Knowledge to get another kind of Panharmonicon style effect in the deck. I also like that on the adventure, you get to copy something like Miram's effect if you wanted to for one time, for 2 mana, and then you get this down and get that again. So these are the kind of cards that I added in, cards that I'm really enjoying. But let's talk about the cards that I would consider updating the deck with. And there's really two, to be honest. There's only really two. I mean, there's two and a sneaky third one. So the first one's Archdruid Storm. We just talked about it with Goreclaw. It's a great card. The top one makes sense because we can go get a dragon we actually want. I mean, I am playing Worldly Tutor. So, I mean, obviously there's a better copy of this in the deck. Put it on top and get it the next turn. But I kind of like the idea of getting it to your hand. This is a deck that can play around with having treasures and lots of mana. This would make sense to kind of finish off a combo that turn. So that completely makes sense. A card that I love the idea of it because it seems like it's really fun is Corporeal Projection. This is from the Clue set. It's a 2-mana spell that says target creature you control gains Myriad until end of turn. And for 7 mana, you can give all of your creatures Myriad. Now, the first question you're going to ask yourself is, why would you care about Myriad? Well, you have to remember that I'm playing a deck that tends to make tokens and a deck that cares about when dragons enter the battlefield, dealing damage either equal to their power or equal to how many dragons I have to our opponents. The deck that this way most efficiently wins is either Scourge of Valkus or Dragon Tempest, dealing damage equal to the number of dragons I have to an opponent when a dragon or a creature with flying or a dragon comes in. So with Corporeal Projection, if I give my entire board Myriad for 7 mana, even if it's 5 creatures and I swing all of that at somebody, provided there's a full table still, I'm getting 10 dragons automatically ETBing. Now, for the record, if any of them are legendary, we're going to have to sacrifice them, but the triggers are still going on the stack. Meaning that with the Dragon Tempest on the battlefield and 5 dragons, I'm now getting 10 copies of 15 damage since they all come in at the same time. And you're now going to probably nuke the game before you even get to blocks. When you even get to sacrificing those creatures. Maybe you have to sacrifice the creatures. Okay, so let's say Miram's the one that's legendary. We're going down to what? 12 instead of 15. It's still, that could be tough. And remember, for any copies that Miram creates, the tokens, they become non-legendary, meaning that this period they're always going to stick through. It seems like a ton of fun. I also like that you can put it on your creature of your choice, meaning we can really have some fun with what's attacking. It's a card that will probably go in, at least for me to try, and at worst case scenario, we just pull it because it doesn't work, right? And the third card is Doppelgang. The card makes a ton of sense. For each of X target permanents, create X tokens that are a copy of that permanent. It wouldn't take very long for me in the deck to show you why this could be good. We have things like Doubling Season in the deck. We have things like Astral Dragon, which combos with Doubling Season and makes an absolute headache for most boards. But again, make a copy of Scourge of Valkus, make a copy of Dragon Tempest, make a copy of a lot of things, and we could probably, Virtue and Knowledge, we could probably take advantage of that pretty quickly and just end the game out of hand. 6 mana into the X's, 2 mana into each X and 8 mana total to make a copy, make 2 copies of Scourge of Falcus and Dragon Tempest. Will probably end the game on the spot, depending on how many dragons I have and what other things are going on. So I think that these are the kind of cards that they require the right board state, but are probably the things that decks looking for. The sneaky fourth card that I really love is Mirror March. I want to play this card so bad, but whenever a non-token creature comes in, flip a coin until you lose a flip. For each flip you win, make a token of a copy that gains haste. Nothing more makes me want... I want nothing more than to win a game because of Mirror March, just making a ton of copies of a dragon and pinging people for damage or giving them haste. But it's 6 mana, and 6 mana seems like a lot for something you could potentially not get a ton of value from, and that's the reason why I won't put it in. But man, I really love the idea of putting it in and making it work. But those are really the big 3 cards I would consider adding. And at the moment, I haven't played Miram in a while. I need to replay this deck, especially with these new ads. Like I said, it's a little sweatier of a deck, and it's tough to find a table where Miram really fits what everybody's trying to play. Well, Jetty got a ton of love got more love before Ixalan than it did in Ixalan. Really, the 2 big cards that Jetty got in Ixalan that I really love are a Nimpakal, a creature that could potentially give you, in future turns, a bunch of tokens, these gnome tokens that are coming in. Remember that with Jetmir, you just need 9 creatures to turn on his ability. You don't need them to attack, meaning that as long as you declare an attack with less than 9 creatures, if you get above 9 creatures once you get to damage, you're still getting that buff. And that's the thing that I think a lot of people don't think about with Jetmir, is you don't have to declare the attack with 9 creatures. You need the 9 creatures once you get to damage. And so what I've tried my best with this deck to do is play a lot of these types of abilities, like Adeline, Legion War Boss, Goblin Rebel Master, these things that are making creatures when you attack, because a lot of people don't think about that. They just think about, I need 9 before I make my attack. But I'll tell you that it can be very dangerous for your opponents if you're making these creatures after you declare the attack, because then your board state could look a lot worse. And any of those creatures you bring in tapped and attacking, those gnomes, those humans off of Adeline, are coming in with Jetmir as 4/1s with double strike and trample, which is very difficult to deal with in an average game of Commander. The other card is Charismatic Conqueror. This card, most of the time, is basically a blind obedience effect, where your opponents are going to choose not to give us the 1/1s, because then those turn into 4/1 vampires with lifelink and double strike and trample that are going to become near impossible for our opponents to dig themselves out from underneath. But let me tell you, when this card actually works, it's so much fun to get those in 1/1s and punish our opponents for giving them to us, and I absolutely love it. We got Kutzel. Kutzel's okay. I'm actually thinking about taking Kutzel out for Sovereign Akanekahau, which we'll talk about once we get down to the considering, because I think it'll do a lot better than Kutzel. For the purposes of this deck, but we'll talk about that in a second. I finally added Court of Calling because it got that reprint in Rapidly Remastered, and it's won me a game already. So I got to use this to go get an Impacall in one game and Adeline in another game and help me win a game outright. So very, very, very happy about that. Getting into what has come out in either Karlov Manor or more recent sets that I'm willing to put in. The card that when I literally saw it, the first thought of my deck thought was, do I just literally take Impact Tremors out? And that's War Leader's Call. This is a strictly better Impact Tremors. Impact Tremors just says whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Now this gives a +1/+1 to each of our opponents, or each of our creatures as well. And when I originally built this deck, it cared a lot more about that Perforos, Witty Roastmaster, Impact Tremor styles of effects. And they're in there, don't get me wrong. I just very rarely see them. What I like about War Leader's Calls, it's both. It's that effect and a flat +1/+1, turning all of our 4/1 tokens with Double Strike and Trample into 5/2s, which is a huge difference in damage and makes, I think, everything even better. The second is Dauntless Dismantler. Just kind of seems like an interesting card from Ixalan. Artifacts come in tapped under opponent's control. You can pay 1 into each of the X and knock out Soul Ring and every other 1 mana rock, 2 to knock out the 2 mana rocks. I don't know. I know I'm not in love with it, but I think it makes sense why it would work in the deck and why it could be good. Getting your opponent's things to come in tapped and maybe trying to take advantage of that. Sovereign Akanekahau is definitely the card that's coming in when I do this. Whenever it attacks, for each creature you control with power greater than their base power, put a number of +1/+1 counters on that creature equal to the difference. Let's go back to those 1/1s, right? with 9 creatures, they turn into 4/1s with double strike and trample. They're now turning into 7/4s with double strike and trample, and your opponent's probably dead. I mean, at that point, how are you going to block? If you couldn't block 4/1s with double strike and trample profitably, you're not going to block 7/4s with double strike and trample effectively. This is a card that I can't wait to get in there and play a game with, because I think it's just going to end up beating the tar out of our opponents. And the card that maybe doesn't look very flashy on itself, but a card that I want to try out, is Breston Monopter Leader. This is from the Doctor Who set. I built this deck on the back of X spells that make tokens, and I think this is another great one. It comes in as an XX, where X is the amount we put into that, so it comes in as a fairly decent body. It makes X 1/1 green and white alien creature tokens with flying, and then when we attack one more insects, put a +1/+1 counter on each of them, meaning that now they're becoming bigger. Again, those 1/1s that are 4/1s with Jetmir become 5/2s, and again, now they're in the air. Double strike, trample. You know, we can talk to where we're blue in the face about this effect and why I think it could be good. It would just come down to how often does Vreston actually get to attack. I can see Vreston being a lot better at getting me that 8th or 9th or whatever creatures I need to turn Jetmir online and get a big attack in. And then a card I've had so much fun playing with on Arena that I'm really excited to try out, maybe eventually at some point, is Heroic Intervention or Heroic Reinforcements, making 2 1/1s and giving all creatures we control +1/+1 in haste until end of turn. I could see this being really good on a turn where we can play something and this, or like play Jetmir and this, and just turn a whole board online. Remember that Jetmir is a 5/4 that with his own ability turns into an 8/4. With Heroic Interventions, it would turn into a 9/5 with double strike and trample, which could just, help knock somebody out on their own. It's a card I really like, and a card I think that could be good. But again, it just comes down to what do you take out instead of it? I mean, there's so many great cards in this deck that I'm just not sure, and for that reason, I'm just not sure what to cut. But I really like it. I like it. It's done well for me in Brawl. The question just becomes, what card do you take out? And at Thunder Junction, when we go to make these changes, we'll talk about maybe hopefully what that one is. For Alayla, like I said before, this is a deck that whenever you cast a artifact or enchantment spell, you make a 1/1 fairy, and this deck is all about getting those fairies online and attacking with them and dealing massive damage with all these flyers. The big cards I added recently were my friend was starting to get out of Magic the Gathering, and so I helped him kind of parse through his collection and help him sell it off so that he could take that money and turn it into other things. And part of that collection that I found was a copy of Post the Enchanter, Zur the Enchanter, but Post Malone's version of it, as well as Bolas's Citadel or Post Citadel. And these are 2 cards that I had thought about for this deck, but I just hadn't got around to getting them. But when I had opportunities to have them sitting in my lap, I thought, why not? I traded him relevant value worth of cards to keep them, and I put them right in this deck because I thought they just fit. Zur the Enchanter can go get some really fun things out of your deck and put them on the battlefield and enjoy them, and Bolas's Citadel is just a fun time getting to cast things off the top of your library. And in a deck where Alayla has lifelink, and there's other ways to give your creatures lifelink, or to buff Alayla herself, we can definitely have plenty of extra life to be able to cast things off the top of our library. As far as the most recent updates, I mean, Wilds of Eldraine added things like Obira, which is a card I actually seen do some decent work in the deck. Actually, funny enough, the Commander decks made me put Lethal Scheme in here. It's a card that on its face doesn't look very good, a 4-mana destroy a creature spell, but it convokes, meaning I can tap my fairies to help me do it. And each creature that does it connives, which just means a little bit of draw and parsing through our hands. But the big things that got added in this deck for Lost Gimmick Cyclone, I finally put a One Ring in here. I know the One Ring has its own reputation in Commander, but it does really well. I've literally only seen it once in this deck, and I had it for like 2 turns before I won the game. So I didn't really get to even see it, but I think it's a card that wins. I pulled a Kindred Discovery, this version, out of one of my Wilds of Eldraine packs that I opened up on the channel, and so I decided to throw that in here. I just felt like it fit really well there. But Court of Antris out of those Wilds of Eldraine Commander set was really good fit here for what the deck's trying to do. potentially copy some enchantments or artifacts. But the card that I've seen that I brought in over the last set and has really done well for me is Legion Loyalty. Legion Loyalty is a card that looks bonkers on its face, but when you have 8 or 10 flying 3/2s with Layla, or 3/1s or whatever, or what have you, the deck plays things like Rally the Ranks and favorable winds to buff all of our creatures. If I have a bunch of, let's say, 4/2 flying fairies in the air, 10 of them, and I have a Legion Loyalty, I point 10 of them in the air at one opponent, and every other opponent gets 10 copies of them going at them. Legion Loyalty can just absolutely end a game outright if no one has a way to deal with it, and that's why I absolutely love it. But let's get into the cards that I've been looking at adding. The first one, I feel like a broken record anytime you talk about a tribal deck. Roaming Throne, of course, works really well with Alayla because you get 2 fairies instead of 1 when it's on the battlefield. It's also an artifact, meaning that when you cast it, you're going to get a fairy. It feels right. I mean, it makes sense. I don't play a ton of creatures in the deck because you really want to be spamming artifacts and enchantments out, but I feel like Roaming Throne makes sense, right? Anytime you can double up Alayla's triggers are pretty great. You can also double up Obira's trigger as well, with it being a fairy. But the main point is you're putting it down for Alayla to double up her trigger as you cast instant sorceries. I kind of like the idea of Eaten by Piranha as a 2-mana flash enchant aura that can turn a creature into a 1/1 skeleton with no abilities. This seems like it'd be fun to stop a combo or shut something down if we need it to. Yes, removal is always great, but sometimes you don't have the mana for it or something happens. What I like about this is it would also net us fairies when we cast it, or 1 fairy or multiple fairies if we have those abilities out. I feel like that makes sense. Get the trigger on somebody else's turn could give us an extra blocker, but also could just shut down a combo if our opponent isn't expecting it. Distant Melody is a card I've never been very high on, just because I've never had a deck where I think it functioned the way I expected it to, and this is kind of the deck to do it. There's plenty of games where you have 6 or 7 fairies on board and 4 mana to draw 7 and get into a couple other enchantments or buff enchantments or artifacts. Feels like exactly what the deck wants to do. And so I think I'm going to try to work it back in as another draw source instead of just another Bristic Study or Mystic Remora. This could be fun and some burst draw. Notorious Throng is a card that I've had in the deck in the past, but I've been really trying to figure out how many fairy rogues or how many rogues I have in the deck to see if I can make Notorious Throng work. It says we can cast it for its prowl cost if we dealt combat damage to a player with this turn with a rogue. Create X 1/1 black fairy heat tokens with flying, where X is the damage dealt to your opponent's this turn. If the spell's prowl cost was paid, take an extra turn. I mean, the obvious answer is Bitter Blossom, right? Bitter Blossom makes fairy rogue tokens. But the question became, do I have other spells that are, or other abilities that are making fairy rogue tokens? And the question is, I'm just not sure that I have enough other effects in the deck. I think there's one more other one, but the question is 2 good enough? Like, what do I need to do to find more abilities to make those fairy rogues and bring that, Notorious Throng in? Of course, Raise the Palisades, a card that could come in, bouncing all non-fairies back. But to be honest, I feel like most of the time I don't really need it, because against a ground deck, you're just going to win the game anyway in the air. And if your opponent has flyers, they're not going to be able to block effectively unless you're playing against dragons or angels. And if you're playing against dragons or angels, we just need to either try to block our way out of the game or or go wider than them. I mean, that's just the truth, right? Those are the only 2 decks we're afraid of when it comes to flyers that are bigger than ours. Otherwise, we're probably just going to be the people that win the game in that sense. And the 5th card I'm looking at is Luminarch Ascension, a card I've always loved. And for 2 mana, you can make a 4/4 as long as you go 4 turns without taking damage during your opponent's turns. It's a card that to some people might not make a lot of sense, but when you're just buffing flying creatures in general, things like favorable winds and Alayla's ability, Alayla's ability doesn't say blue creatures get it or fairies get it. It says other creatures with flying. Turn those angels into 5/4s. I mean, no, it doesn't get the benefit of something like Rally the Ranks or Etchings of the Chosen, because we're going to always choose fairy for those. but it will get the buff of favorable winds or intangible virtue. You know what I mean? So I think there's enough of a critical mass in Sparring Leader. Those things are still going to buff those angels, which makes me feel like it's probably still worth it. And I don't think you mind dumping 8 mana for your turn on somebody else's end step into getting angels and having them ready for your turn to attack. But that's where I'm at on Alayla. The deck functions pretty well without them. It just comes down to, could we make these small changes to make the deck a little bit more efficient? Getting into Timey-Wimey, this is a deck that I think I'm still putting through the paces, really, and understanding how the deck works. It relies a little bit too much on Rose, but that was also kind of the way I designed the deck. And so I was trying to really add in more effects that I can use to take advantage of the game. Quintorius can, dealing damage to our opponents when they get spells off of exile makes a ton of sense. I added Narset in there. It's a card that makes a ton of sense. If I have a board giving them all prowess, making them bigger, making it harder for our opponents to deal with it, makes a ton of sense. The Fifth Doctor was a creature I added in here because I think it helps. At the beginning of your end step, put a counter on each creature you control that didn't attack or enter the battlefield this turn and untap them. Just, hey, if your creature came in this turn and didn't attack, or, it didn't come in this turn, and it didn't attack, maybe something like the 10th Doctor, which doesn't actually have to attack to get its trigger, hey, just grow it and make it harder to deal with for our opponents. Not a lot was added because, again, a lot of the big edits for this deck came when the Doctor Who set came out. The big one, as far as the new cards go, were Passionate Archaeologist. This was a part of those Costco deck boxes that I bought that we opened up on the channel. I took one of the Passionate Archaeologists out of that Foldhorn deck and put it right into Timey-Wimey, as well as that Quintorius. So that was really the biggest changes I've made as of late. Really, a lot of the deck has stayed the same since the Doctor Who set came out, instead of just going through and finding the more fun versions of some of the deck lists. But as far as cards to add, the Millennium Counter just seems like a ton of fun. One, it has time counters on it, so I feel like that could matter. Rose cares about how many permanents have time counters on them, so the Millennium Counter will always get us an extra one, and it's a way to knock someone out of the game. It just seems like a fun card, and I think it could matter in the grand scheme of things. Probably not, but hey, it seems fun. But Watcher of Hours just came out in the Commander decks, and this is a card that makes a ton of sense. We can put it on Suspend, 6 for 2 mana, and whenever we remove a time counter from it, we surveil 1. There's a couple creatures in our deck that have this effect that work really well. Dinosaurs on a Spaceship give us a 2/2 Dino every time you take a counter off of it. Atraxi Warden, sorry, not Atraxi Warden. Which one is it? Sorry, Starwheel. No, not Starwheel. Which is the other one that gives you things when counters come off of it? I'm spacing at the moment. Okay, I thought there was another creature, but maybe there's not. So it would add another creature that would get things whenever the counters come off of it and give us more abilities. And then eventually it's just a 6/6 flyer with Ward 3, which I don't feel like is bad at all by any means. Time Beetle is a card that a lot of people have played, and I didn't have in the deck, but I'm sure it probably makes sense. It has Skulk, which makes it pretty hard to block, and we get to time trail whenever it hits. I guess it makes sense. I just didn't have it in here because I was trying to focus on more ways to either make Rose unblockable or make copies of Rose to hit for more damage. But I could see why Time Beetle would make a ton of sense for that purpose. Rotating Fireplace, another thing to have time counters on it. Adding mana equal to the number of time counters on it makes a ton of sense. And then 4 mana to time travel makes sense. It costs 7 to do that 3 times with the 10th Doctor. If we need to do it once, 4 mana seems like a decent rate. And hey, it's a mana rock at the end of the day, but again, it's another permanent to get time counters on it, which the whole deck cares about. And then a card that I put in and got to see it work once or twice, and it's one of my pet cards for spell slinging decks, is Arcane Bombardment. A card that I truly love, and in this deck just seems like a ton of fun. Every turn when you cast your first instant or sorcery, you exile a random one of either of those from your graveyard and put it underneath it, and you can cast every card underneath it without paying their mana costs. This card just gets bonks and out of hand, and it works really well with Quintorius and some of the things like Metallurgic Summonings and Passionate Archaeologist. The card makes sense. It'll probably come back in after Junction. And then the last one is Prisoner's Dilemma. I don't know. It's probably not worth it for what it actually does, but I like it. It's a trap for some people, and it could just spread damage around. But it's the perfect card to put underneath Arcane Bombardment. And it could just be fun to turn this deck into an Arcane Bombardment deck if we can get there and just have a ton of fun. Last up is Pants. Of course, Pants just got a ton of updates with Lost Cannons Ixalan, meaning that the deck came out and got updated. There weren't really any, like, to be honest, there weren't really any big cards I thought about adding for Karlov Manor. Mainly because I think I'm still running this deck through its paces. I'm still testing and I'm still trying to figure out if my game plan works the way I want it to. At the moment, it's try to discover into Polani's Hatcher or Registar Alpha your haste enablers, start ramming in with your dinos. We have Kahira as our companion to potentially give all of our dinos vigilance, if that's the route we go. We have things like Ephemera and Cloud Shift to blink a dino on somebody else's turn to get another discover. Savage Order creates a really fun combo with Galta, dumping your entire hand into play if that's what you want to do. Or it can go get us one of those dinosaurs to give our whole board haste if that's what we want to do as well. I like Savage Order, and it's just a fun way to get Galta through a handful of dinos to put them all down onto the battlefield and get that going. But really, we added Sneak Attack to make it more of a Sneak Attack-y type deck, because I feel like Sneak Attack still works. Get something in on your turn, especially if it's maybe not a high-value dinosaur. Get the Discover, slam into somebody with it, just have a good time. The other fun way that I think could be fun to protect our board is Legion's Initiative. For 2 mana, you can exile all creatures we control. Beginning of the next combat, we return those creatures on the battlefield our control, and they get haste. This is just a way to protect our board. I think we always want to protect our board in creature decks where we're going wide. And it's just another way to do it. Protect the board, bring them back, get that Discover trigger when they all come in, and slam in. And then Touch the Spirit Realm is here mainly for its channel ability to exile a creature and bring it back in at the beginning of the next end step, but it also could just be removal. But mainly it's in there for the 2 mana white, blink something, bring it back in, and get that Discover trigger, hopefully in somebody else's turn. This is a deck that I really don't think is too overpowered. It's played really well at the shop. At the end of the day, it's a tribal go-wide creature deck, so you have to deal with dinos at some point in combat. If you can stick Pants and keep the deck running, it does really well. I've tried to put some big dinos up in on the top end to really take advantage of what makes our deck really good and punish our opponents. But if you get locked down, it can be a tough deck. And I'm not trying to play a lot of things to make this difficult to deal with. You'll note I'm not playing any, there's no Triumph for the Hordes or anything like that. We are playing an overwhelming Stampede. We're really not playing a ton of like power doublers like a Natural Growth or anything like that. We're just trying to get things down, take advantage, and just try to eventually get to the point where we take a big swing at our opponents. But guys, that is my updates, my Karlov Manor talk through my main decks. I'm going to have a link to all 6 of the deck lists down in the description. This will be a link to my personal Moxfield page where I do all of my personal brewing, as well as the time codes so you could see all of the decks as they is. Thank you guys so much for voting in the polls, saying what content you want to make. This is something I hope to do more regularly, talk about my main decks and talk about the decks that I really care about and the things that I'm enjoying as of late. I hope this is a kind of an idea for a deck you like. Let me know down in the comments that you like this style of video, and I will catch you guys next time.